This is Mitch, and welcome to the 1000houses.com podcast. I have Tracy Rewey here, and we're going to be talking real estate lien notes, the ins and outs, how to create them, how to buy them, how to sell them, how to even sell a piece of one called a partial. So how are you doing today, Tracy?
I'm doing well, Mitch. It's great to be back on the show. I know we have a shared love for seller financing, creative financing. It's always fun being on your show and talking notes.
Yep, I started a love affair with note cash flow a long time ago, and it's never ended. In fact, my love has just grown deeper and deeper.
Well, I just did a presentation for our Wise Women Expo. It's called My 30-Year Romance with Creative Financing. So we obviously shared the same love, the same passion.
Yep. So as people out there may or may not know, I specialize in creating seller finance notes, which is, buying a house for 50 cents on the dollar, selling it for 100 cents on the dollar with a 10% down payment, and carrying the 90% balance, for 30 years fixed at 10%. That's what I do.
Yeah.
But early in my career, and I don't intend to sell notes anymore, although I do when I want to come up with $1 million or whatever to buy or to put on it as a down payment for a storage facility or something, So I don't liquidate notes until I do. And when I do, I'm moving into some other cash flow stream, which is forever, because notes will expire eventually. They all do. And I try to move my money over into something forever. And I specialize in self-storage units and boat storages on dry land and all that stuff. So that's my forever strategy play. I also have sold partials because for lots of reasons. I wish I'd have sold a partial on every note I ever did. I wish I'd have just held 2 years, just 2 years of every note I ever owned.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been 2,500 times I would have been owed 2 years worth of payments, still. So, but you live and you learn.
Yeah. It's the 2020 hindsight, right?
Yeah.
Well, Mitch, there's believe it or not, there's 23.5 billion with a B of that seller finance paper created like you're doing every year. And people don't realize, I think, seller financing is real small, but it's actually a sizable chunk of the market. Now, there's maybe 20% of people who understand how to do it the right way, like you create it as a strategy. And the other 80% are just people who sold a property, took back a note. It's not something they do normally. So it's not always exactly the way a note buyer would love to see it. But we come in after the fact. We're the companies that like to come in and buy the notes from people who created them like you do.
Yeah. So it's important to say, if you're a consistent manufacturer of real estate lien notes and creator of them, then you need to apply by the certain state and federal laws so that your note has more weight, so that it's less cumbersome for someone like Tracy to buy, so that you can get the highest dollar for your asset, or to sell that personal piece of property that you have called a real estate lien note. Let's talk about that for a second. I bet you love it when you see someone like me that walks through the door. I'm all Dodd-Frank compliant. I've done all the stuff, the statutes, my state statutes, all the cooling off periods, all the notifications and all that stuff. And then I have my property with a note servicing company. So there's no jicking around of whether I really got payments or I didn't get payments. So I have this great history of the note that's verifiable. How important is that to the price of a note?
It's very important. So we love to see that. And we also know that somebody's smart enough, they're going to ask for top dollar pricing. So it comes with a good and a bad, right? Because somebody did know to do that. Sometimes I can fix that note and buy it for a better price. But either way, we need to circle around on that. It's a very important fact that you mentioned there. So when we look at notes, we look at 3 Ps. We look at the people, the property, and the paperwork. So the people, can they afford it? And a piece of that Dodd-Frank compliance, as you mentioned, is the ability to repay. Can they afford to make the payment? We don't want to set them up in a transaction they're not going to be able to make the payment. We want to set them up so they can pay and own that house free and clear someday. So we look at the people and their credit worthiness. We look at the property to see if it's got a good loan to value. The buyers have some equity. Like you said, they put some money down, that it's resellable, livable, that sort of thing. And then we look at the paperwork. And I've been doing this since 1988. So the paperwork compliance has gotten tougher. 2014, as you mentioned, Dodd-Frank applied some rules. They did make exemptions for seller financing if you did 1 to 3 in a 12-month period. But people who are doing it regularly definitely need to pay attention to Dodd-Frank and also the SAFE Act, as you mentioned, in their own state. Now, don't get scared. When this first came out, everybody's like, the sky is falling. We're never going to be able to do notes. It's like, no, I did too. I admit it. I'm like, for a while, I'm like, well, I'll just buy notes from before 2014. Well, that was great until, inventory started to dry up, right? So I'm with you. We all did it, but it's like, there is a way to do that. You use an MLO, a mortgage loan originator that understands seller financing and Dodd-Frank and SAFE Act compliance. They'll paper it all up. They'll do the back testing. And now you have a transaction that is compliant and it's easier to sell in the secondary market and you get a better price and you have less claims that the buyer can make because something wasn't done right during the closing.
Yeah. So, I was afraid too. And everyone was packing it in. They were, I'm just going to rent houses. All my seller finance friends says, well, I'm just going to go back to being a landlord and everything. And I started to, and I would go that way. And then I think, man, A, I hate being a landlord. And 2, there's too much money in this. I need to figure it out. So I decided that I was going to get nose to nose with all that regulation and hire an attorney and figure out what the hell does this 2,500 pages say? What do I have to do to comply? Let's just start there. And then it took a while to get through it. But at the end of the day, I had to hire an RMLO and do what they said. Pick one that you trust or one that was highly recommended. Do what they said, pay the fee. And, my houses used to be zero down. I mean, zero closing costs, zero closing costs. Yeah. And you could meet me at 8 in the morning and you could go get your money at noon while we were doing the papers and you could come sign at 4 and you could be moving in at 5 o'clock. And if for no closing costs, just your down payment, approval, and that was it. Well, guess where all that regulation gets, all the expense for that regulation gets pushed right to the buyer, the person they were trying to protect. It always happens. And now it's about, $1,700 to close closing costs. And you can't get in a house for 10 or 15 days. It just takes time for all this paperwork to go through. So
we adapt, right? But we adapt, we carry on, we find new ways of doing things. And at the end of the day, I agree. We wish it was the other way, but we've all found ways to make it work and we can pass those costs on to the borrower, so it doesn't affect our profitability. But as you mentioned, it requires them to bring a little more to closing.
Yeah, but and I hate to say this because it pains me, but then I started looking at people harder and my default rate fell drastically. I'm down to 1% default rate. Even through COVID, it didn't change. Yeah. Because we were, if you're going to look at these people and they're making you do this stuff, then just look at them hard. You're already in the file. You're already in their background. You're already in their credit. I mean, what standard do we want to set? And we ended up finding much better buyers, you know what I mean? And so I hate to admit it, but it did do something for us,
Yeah, I agree.
What does your typical note look like? Who's your typical note seller and what does your typical note look like?
Well, we work with 2 types of sellers. Some sellers have only created one note in their whole lifetime, and they probably won't create another note. And so they look like all shapes and forms. People who are manufacturing, creating notes as part of their strategy for buying and selling real estate, they ideally have 10% down, 10% or 9.5% interest rate, 30-year term. They've got a nice papered up file. They verified the borrower has the ability to repay. So that would be like the ideal note, but we buy notes with 0% interest rates. We just have to discount them down. If we want a 10% yield, we're going to have to discount those down or do a partial or do some other creative strategy. So notes come in all shapes and sizes, but our standard one is just like the one you mentioned at the top of the show, 10% down. If they don't have good credit, at least they have, sometimes they have no credit. That's very common. I'd rather to see somebody with no credit than bad credit. If they have bad credit, we look to see what sort of life circumstances have happened that might have contributed to that, if it's habitual or if it's just a one-off life event that they've recovered from.
Yes, we're looking for, when I'm trying to find a buyer for my seller financed house, I'm looking for a good person that had something bad and they've recovered, but the credit bureau's not not forgiving them. And so, and a lot of times, man, I don't care who you are, and I've had good credit my whole life, but don't think I'm so naive to think that it couldn't happen to me. It could happen to me. It could happen to all of us. And so, the cool thing is, Tracy and Mitch Stephen, we're not box checkers. We can actually go in, inquire, do some investigation, feel around, and find out, is there anything salvageable about this applicant? What's the redeeming factors? And we can make decisions based on the information that we find, and that's all we ever do. We live or die by that reconnaissance. You do that, you live or die by it in the note business for sure. I live and die by it by the person that I make a note with. So it's very important to do that. But so many people just take the first person that comes along that has a down payment, or takes the person with the biggest down payment, which is not necessarily the best guy for your business. You know what I mean?
You need to perform some due diligence on them. And really, we're all in this for profit, but we also are able to do good. So we can provide people affordable home ownership and a second chance. And, if you've done this well, you'll find that in 7 to 10 years, that people will go out and refinance and pay you off, and you do it all over again. So that's, when you get to send them either the paid in full release of deed of trust, or if you're in a contract for deed state, the deed, that's a very happy day. And I'm sure you have had many people thank you over the years for providing that ability to own their own home. Yes,
but while we're on the subject, most of the people that I sell notes to, they're inherently flawed. They just can't seem to make 12 months worth of car payments on time. There's always 1 month straggling or something. And that's why I took balloons out of my notes.
Yes.
Because they're flawed when I met them, and just because I put a balloon in the payment doesn't mean they're gonna unflaw themselves. They're gonna be who they are. So I just started making 30-year straight mortgages because I got tired of having to make a choice to either take the person's house away from them because they're not meeting the balloon requirements and paying me off, or letting them see that they can walk all over the contract that they signed. And it was not a good thing either way. So I just started going to 30-year mortgages. Now, what's the argument in 30-year mortgages? A lot of note buyers like shorter notes, and they'll say your note's worth more if it's shorter. But I have found that there are people out there that appreciate 30-year notes too, because they last longer and they hold their balance longer,
I like all notes. You just have to find the right way to buy each note. The time value of money, when you put it into one of my favorite financial tools, is a financial calculator like the HP 12C. When you're discounting it down, if somebody was smart enough to write it at 9%, 30 years for 9% is great. If somebody wrote it at 3 or 4%, and now we're wanting 9%, the longer that stretches out, the less it is worth in today's present value dollar. So from that perspective, that can be problematic. But if you wrote them right with a good interest rate, long-term is wonderful. We'll buy shorter or long-term. We just have to find the right price based on investment to value, how much we're investing compared to what the property's worth, and what the remaining term is on the notes, including the interest. And then we figure that out, those two things, and then we can come back with the price. That's why we transition a lot to partials. If somebody did a really long-term 3 or 4% interest note, then perhaps we'll just buy the next 5 or 10 years, and then they can continue to have some of that interest work on the residual side, and then we can buy some more payments if the borrower or buyer hasn't paid off by then.
So let's explain a partial. Let's say I have 25 years left on a 30-year note. Did you guys know that you could just sell the next 5 years and Tracy could collect the next 5 years worth of payments, but then at the end of that 5 years, the note reverts back to you.
Yep.
You know, so that's what's called a partial. Also, I would like to talk about, people say, who the hell was going to pay 9 or 10% to move, you know, on a mortgage? Who does that? Well, let me tell you, it's kind of like a tote your note car lot. The person that's there is not really interested in the price, and they're not interested in the rate. They just want to know, can I come up with enough down payment to satisfy this seller, and can I afford the payments? Yep. And so it's the kind of the same thing in the house business. So let me tell you how we overcome it. I have a rent formula, and if I can figure out the rents in the neighborhood, I back into the rents to find out a sales price of my house, so that after they give me a 10% or better down payment, their principal, interest, taxes, and insurance and servicing, PITS payment, is about what they're paying for rent, or less, a little bit less, or a little bit more, or dead on, but you know, it's right there. So the question is, this person is going to be a renter for the rest of their life if they don't find an owner financier like myself, or someone like us, Tracy. And so are they going to be a renter the rest of their life? Or are they going to go ahead and move into a house with the same monthly payment? Who gives a damn that the interest rate's 10%? You know, it shouldn't, because they're in a losing position right now. They're renters. How much equity do you get as a renter? Zero. How much appreciation do you get as a renter? Zero. You know, how many tax write-offs do you get as a renter? Zero. What are the rents going to be in 10 years from now?
Yep.
They're not going to be the same as my mortgage payment. My mortgage payment is going to stay the same. It might be at 10%, but it's not going up, you know. And then in 15 years, what will the rent be? What will the rent be in 20 years? What will it be in 25 years? I have realtors accuse me, not all the time because I run away from them most of the time, but when they trap me in a house, they say, you know, you're ripping these people off at 10%. I'm going, no, the landlord's ripping them off. He's not giving them anything, and he's charging the same as me this year, and he'll be charging more than me next year.
Well, hey, real estate agents charge 6% up front. So we use that as an argument. Yeah, they're just, so look, most of the notes we see don't have any prepayment penalties. That pretty much went away over the years. And so people can always, when they qualify for those lower rates, they can always go out and refinance and pay off without a prepayment penalty. So this gives them that vehicle, that avenue, that path until they are able to get the traditional financing. And as you mentioned, it's a home that they get to own, they get to live in it. And I'd much rather, you know, I have people also claim that, well, it's very risky to owner finance for people, or to have owner finance notes. And I'm like, these are the same people that are landlords, and they'll let somebody move in for $1,000 deposit. And these people are renters. Renters do not take care of homes like owners do. Owners take care of it. They maintain it. They pay taxes and insurance and maintenance. Renters call you at 2 a.m. after they get home from the bar and they've locked themselves out, or in the morning when their 3-year-old flushes their favorite stuffed animal down the toilet. Owners don't call the banks when those things happen. So I would rather be a lien lord than a landlord. And we get a down payment, and people make their payments. And as you say, you just got to make sure that they can afford it, and it's not much more than what it would be to rent.
Yeah, I like that. So that was one of the deciding factors for me to move from being a landlord and then go into, I like that word, lien lord. I never heard that before. Did you coin that?
I would love to say I made it up, but I heard it and I borrowed it because it's a good one.
Okay, let's borrow it again.
Okay.
Who said it? Do you
I don't know. I just heard it somewhere. I wish I could say I made it up, but no.
Okay, so because that's what I noticed. I was a landlord, and and on my paperwork, you know, on my goal sheet, you know, I was getting these houses, and I knew how much I owed, and I know how much the rent was. And then I had this number that I was supposed to collect at the end, and it was supposed to be my money, but it always turned out to be way less, if any at all, in that number. And so I was a landlord with about 25 houses for about 2 years. And I figured out I wasn't making any money. I mean, I was getting some appreciation, but I was really just banking my own expenses, you know, sort of. So I started looking into owner financing. And the cool thing about owner financing was when the payment came in from my payer, it was my money because there was no reason for it to go out. If the air conditioner broke, it wasn't my air conditioner. If the roof leaked, it wasn't my roof. The only reason I would ever have to spend any of that money was if they didn't pay at all and I had to hire an attorney to get them out. But then I was going to find another person with another down payment and make it all up and more, and probably sell the house for, you know, a bigger sales price than originally, because houses in general go up over the years in value. And so I learned the dynamic. Renters move in, tear your house down and move out. And owner finance buyers move in, fix your house up because it's their house now.
Yep.
And they stay for years and years and years. Mine only get paid off like 98% of the time. When I'm getting a payoff, they didn't refinance because of that flaw that I'm talking about. What they did was they needed to move, or they wanted to move to a different house, or they got transferred or something, and they got a realtor to list the house. And that's when I'm getting the call for the payoff, is they sold the house to a new loan buyer, and they got to pay me off.